Hello, this being my last video of 2024, I want to tell you why I believe that next year, 2025, is going to be one of the worst years we've ever experienced in this country in modern times. I think the signs are all extremely negative, and despite the government telling us that they're going to make Brexit work and that we're going to become the fastest growing economy in the G7, I think things are pretty grim. And I'll just start by reading you a few of the economic statistics that have appeared in the press lately and different stories concerning the economy. According to the LSE, they reckon that small and medium-sized businesses have lost 27 billion in exports since we left the EU. Goldman Sachs, they did a survey amongst 10,000 small businesses, and they concluded that the biggest complaint amongst all those businesses was that Brexit was hampering trade. The CBI, a very well-respected organisation which represents businesses big and small throughout the country, they produced a report in which they said, and the words they used were, in 2025, they expect a steep decline in economic activity. We know how difficult things are. We know how costs are rising, costs of raw materials are rising. We know how there's terrible labour shortage. We know how people are not spending because they're worried, they're anxious about what's going to happen, and more and more businesses are going bust, and a lot of businesses are unable to pay, unable to pay on time, which means that they make it more difficult for other businesses, and generally the economy is in a dreadful state. At the same time, we've got, as a result of Brexit, we've got these terrible shortages of labour, skilled labour, particularly in construction, hospitality, and in the health service. And of course, the increase in the employers' national health insurance is going to mean that employers are going to be less inclined to take people on and probably try and get rid of people, if anything. And it's going to be a generally inflationary consequence of that. In the year to September, 4,264 construction firms went bust. This is in a country where the government says we're going to build 1.5 million houses in the next 4.5 years, where there's a severe shortage of bricklayers in particular. The economy, according to official figures, has flatlined for the last 2 quarters, and there's every possibility we're going to have a recession. GDP growth has been negative for the last 2 months. October, negative growth in all 3 sectors of the economy, that's services, manufacturing and construction. And since we left the EU 3 years ago, chemicals, which is quite an important part of the economy, the chemical industry has shrunk by 37%. And at the same time, we're borrowing more and more money. UK debt interest is now £102 billion a year. That's £2 billion a week in debt interest. And then there are all the social consequences. I mean, according to our newspaper, as many as 1 in 5 people are being taken to court over council tax debt in some of the poorest parts of England. This is just months before council tax goes up by 5%. Councils in England have apparently sought at least 3 million liability orders from households concerning council tax since March. That's the equivalent of 5,300 a day. And you have to think about all the stress that this is bringing on people. You know, when you can't pay your debts, it's terribly stressful. And this is all part of the general demoralisation of the whole nation, really. There's no confidence anywhere. Nobody's feeling optimistic. Nobody thinks things are getting any better. It's all doom and gloom, and with good reason. And yet we keep being told by the Prime Minister that he's going to make us the fastest growing economy in the G7, and he's going for growth. No one's had the slightest idea where this growth is going to come from. And one of the big problems, of course, is shortage of labour. And this is almost beyond belief what has happened with immigration. The way it worked before was, when we were part of the EU, is that people would come here and work, and they'd only come if there were vacancies, and people would come as very often young people. They'd come for 2 or 3 years, then they go home again. because they were so close to home. They could go home for Christmas, go home for Easter, whatever, and they didn't need to bring their family with them, or so on. It all worked pretty well. And of course, we had the enormous benefit that our young people, or anybody from the UK, could go and work and live in the EU. But that was seen as a big problem, because it was said wrongly that all these people coming from the EU were coming to claim council houses and benefits and so on, none of which they could actually claim. And so we left the EU partly to sort out this dreadful immigration problem. And in 2019, which is the before the pandemic, and it's before we actually left the EU, the total immigration into this country was 184,000. That's net. 3 years later, in 2022, that had grown to 764,000 net immigration. And in 2024, this year, up until September, I believe it is, net immigration was 728,000. That's 1.2 million people coming to this country, and 479,000 people leaving. Many of those leaving, of course, are people who are well educated and sought better opportunities elsewhere. And so, of course, the Daily Express and Daily Mail all wrote about this, this dreadful immigration, and of course they harped on and on about the people coming across in little boats, which are a tiny proportion of the total. And so the government announced what they call a crackdown on visa applications. And one of the reasons that so many people came was because when you employ a nurse, as we were doing, or a nurse or whatever from Bangladesh or from Nigeria, they want to bring their family with them. They don't want to leave their families behind. So people were turning up with their whole families, and bring lots of children with them, perhaps who needed schooling and or needed health care and needed somewhere to live and so on. So we had this huge expansion in people coming to this country in order to replace some of the people who were coming previously from the EU. People coming from the EU almost dried up altogether. In fact, there's been a net emigration of EU nationals going back to wherever they come from. And so, because this expansion in the numbers coming to this country, the government decided they had to do something about it. And so they're now making it extremely difficult for anyone to come here. In the first place, you can't bring any dependents with you. If you come to this country, you have to come alone. If anybody wants to employ you in this country, they have to register with the government. They have to apply for permission to invite you to come and work in this country, and they have to show that they've already tried and failed to find a British person to do the job that you're coming for. And definitely you're not allowed to bring dependents anymore. And there is also going to be or there is now a skilled worker visa, and to be able to come to this country as a skilled worker, you need to have a job guaranteed where you're earning at least £38,700 a year. So that's the end of any nurses coming to work here, or bricklayers, or people that we really need in the economy. They're priced out of it. And anybody who wants to come here, if they find an employer who's prepared to employ them and is registered and all the rest of it, when they get here, they have to pay £827 for a visa, and they have to pay £1,035 a year for health insurance. And so we're doing everything possible to make it undesirable to come here. And despite the fact that we're desperate for all these people, these nurses and these bricklayers and these workers in all sorts of areas, we're making it now. We're going to crack down on immigration. We're going to make it as difficult as possible and cut it all down. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to train up our own people. And we're going to reserve all the unskilled workers. People can't come here to do unskilled work anymore. So we're going to reserve all the unskilled work for our own British nationals. And as far as students are concerned, well, previously students coming here to do postgraduate work, PhDs and things, they could come for a couple of years. They could bring their wife or their child, or their husband and the child, and whatever. They could bring their limited number of dependents. But that we had to stop all that. And so what has happened is that applications to come to British universities from foreign students has fallen considerably by at least 16%. And these 16% are the 16% highest paying students, because foreign students pay a lot more than UK students do. And so that's going to have a huge effect on universities and their survival, because a lot of universities are already in trouble. But the Prime Minister says this is all part of a broader strategy to reshape the UK's approach to immigration fundamentally. In other words, what he's saying, this is all part of a broader strategy to try and appease readers of the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, and Nigel Farage. And as I say, in the meantime, qualified people are leaving this country in what used to be called a brain drain. And yet, despite all this, we're told over and over again that we're going to become the fastest growing country in the G7. We're going to overtake everybody else. And when you look back at Brexit and you see how it's made it harder to sell, made it almost impossible for small and medium-sized companies to sell to the EU, and it's created such huge... We spent 4 years creating barriers to trade with the biggest market in the world. And there's been no compensation elsewhere, because the whole idea of leaving the EU was the fact that we're going to do these trade deals all over the world. And what have we got? We've got a load of roll-on deals, which are the same deals we had when we were in the EU. We've got a miserable deal with Australia and New Zealand where they're laughing at us because the deals were so bad. And I think we've got a deal to sell cheese or something to Japan, lactose intolerant Japan. And that's it. And there's no real sign of deals coming from anywhere else. Certainly not enough to replace what we've lost by leaving the EU. And because we've been so chaotic and incompetent and pathetic, we've got no proper controls on goods coming into the country. From day one, the EU was checking every single thing. You couldn't send a paperclip to France without paperwork. From day one of our leaving the EU. But stuff coming to the UK is just flooding in. Despite the fact there's a French company who's actually looking after Sevington, where all these lorries are supposed to be checked. Goods are being just waved through. And who knows what's coming into the country? We're seeing all these stories about rotten meat, and who knows what else is in all these lorries that come through every day. There was a report last week about £65,000 worth of illegal cigarettes being seized in Staffordshire. I mean, that's just one of maybe thousands of consignments of illegal goods. And at the same time, our standards are falling. We're lowering our standards in order to try and get more business. And with all this obvious disaster, it seems almost incredible that Labour are not calling out the follies of Brexit and not blaming the Conservatives for all this mess, because they are responsible. And by not calling them out, they're going to get the blame. It is Labour who will be punished. We've got this next year is going to be terrible, and probably the next 2 or 3 years are going to be just as bad. We're going to have all sorts of problems in this country, and Labour will get blamed. They're the government. People will have forgotten about the Tories, and yet we're being told we're going to become the fastest growing economy in the G7. And when you look around the rest of Europe, Iceland's trying to, they're having a referendum with a view to join the EU. 7 countries, including Ukraine, are negotiating to join the EU. Switzerland is being further integrated into the single market, and Bulgaria and Romania are joining Schengen. Ireland and Cyprus want to join Schengen. They can't because they've got border issues. And we're going to be out on our own, and are even more lonely, alongside Russia and Belarus. And people are getting fed up with it. Public opinion poll after public opinion poll is saying that people regret Brexit, that it was a mistake. And in local elections, people are turning against the government. Look at Starmer's popularity. I mean, he's just absolutely collapsing, as is the popularity of Labour, absolutely collapsing. In recent council by-elections, the average drop in Labour support has been over 30%. In a recent poll, famous poll, 68% said that they would happily now exchange freedom of movement for single market access. And freedom of movement was what it was all about, as I said before. We don't want these foreigners coming here. We don't want Europeans coming here. And then we found that we hadn't got Europeans coming here, so we had to get people from everybody else, and we don't want them coming either. So we don't want any foreigners coming here to help us. And Labour have done a lot of good things. When you look at the things that they've done, for example, they're boosting the legal aid funding by 12%. They're setting up an anti-corruption unit in the city. They're giving councils an excess 69 billion. They're going to renationalise military housing. They're going to compensate people who've been chucked out of the forces for LGBT and veterans issues. They're going to give money to new hospices, or give more money to existing hospices. They're going to give a rise to military personnel. They're going to spend 3.5 million on homeless support. They're going to build 14,000 new prison places by 2031. They're going to increase legal aid, and they're going to 100,000 former miners are going to get an extra £29 a week. And they're cutting business rates for small businesses. Those are all fantastic. They're fantastic, really good. Nobody could really argue with any of those measures, except they're all going to cost an absolute fortune. They're going to cost billions. Now, where's that money coming from? And at the same time, they're pushing ahead with the Conservatives, the Tories' special economic zones and free ports, which everybody knows, and I've talked about this previously, and they're just an invitation to tax evasion, to smuggling, to money laundering. I mean, they're famous for being places where these sort of things happen. And not only that, businesses will move into the economic zones in order to avoid tax because they get big tax breaks. So it just means it's less money coming into the government. But all these good things are not going to be reported in the press. You're not going to hear about them in the press because the press is Tory. What you're going to hear about is waspy women. You're going to hear about the winter fuel payments. You're going to hear about the fact that student fees are going up and bus fares are going up. And the two-child benefit cap is remaining. Those are issues that the Tory press can get into and you'll hear about. And you have to question. I know people get very upset if I say anything about Keir Starmer. When I first criticised him shortly after he became Prime Minister, I lost no end of subscribers. But you have to question somebody whose judgment is so poor on so many issues. This business, going back to this business about the Taylor Swift tickets and his wife's dresses and his glasses and so on. I mean, these were terrible PR blunders. This is a guy who's got a salary of 160,000. Maybe his wife's earning another 100,000. Maybe he got the best part of $250,000 in salary between the two of them. And he's taking free tickets from a Taylor Swift concert. I mean, why didn't he just pay for them? And why does he allow somebody else to buy his glasses and then declare it so that everybody can see it? This is just stupidity. And there have been so many blunders in the last 6 months. Lots of misfortune, but lots of misjudgments, lots of stupid things. And yet, and this tells you all about Starmer, he appeared before the House of Commons Liaison Committee last week or the week before. Now, the Liaison Committee is a committee which is made up of the chairman of all the other committees. Each ministry has a committee. And the chairman of each of these committees interview the Prime Minister. It's a thing that happens every year, just before Christmas. And at the end of this meeting, the chairman, Meg Hillier, she said, is there anything you regret over the last 6 months? Anything you would have done differently? Now, you would have expected him to have replied saying, well, yeah, of course, things were a bit more difficult than we expected, and various things happened we weren't anticipating, and obviously there are things that we might have done differently if we had another chance and so on. But he didn't say that. What Starmer said when asked if there was anything he would have done differently in the last 6 months, he said no, nothing. There was nothing he would have done differently. That's somebody who's either very, very stubborn or somebody who's in denial. And then you have to wonder, for example, Elon Musk, we know he's bought the presidency in America, and it looks like he's got ideas about buying the Reform Party, and there's every possibility they might be the next government, and he's offering 100 million. Now, a lot of countries are immediately putting in limits to how much any individual can donate to a political party. Labour said no plans to bring in any limits. And still we're being told that we're going for growth. And we're going to reset the relationship with the EU. And as I've said so many times before, and so has everybody else, that there is no possibility of significantly resetting the relationship. The possibilities perhaps of tinkering a little bit at the edges, but there's going to be no big resetting. The German ambassador in London, he said about Rachel Reeves, he said that by ruling out the single market and the customs union, she would find that she could achieve very little at best. And so there are no grounds for being optimistic. I mean, where is any growth going to come from? How are things going to change for the better, given the mess we're in at the moment? Yeah, Brexit promised us freedom, prosperity, wealth, deals with countries all over the world. And what has it delivered? Isolation, division, chaos, and poverty. It's just a miserable, miserable country full of people who are very often depressed, all sorts of mental health issues. And you know, concerning mental issues, the UK is the only country in the G7 with more economically inactive people than before the pandemic. In 2023, 35.2 million days were lost owing to sickness, and of that sickness, 50% was mental. People are stressed. Very often, people who've never had any financial stress in their lives have suddenly got stress. How are they going to pay the council tax, or the mortgage, or the rent, or how are they going to buy food? How are they going to feed the children? How are they going to buy school uniforms and stuff? This is, for many people, unbearable stress. And I think one of the consequences of this mess we're in is that the medical illness is going to become a big issue. And we don't have the staff to cope, even now, to cope with medical illness. And if incidences increase significantly, as they're very likely to, who's going to look after all these people? We've made it absolutely clear we don't want any foreigners coming in and helping. Yeah, people are demoralised. The whole nation is demoralised because we've lost hope. And you know, for anybody to be successful in any venture, really, you have to have optimism and confidence that things will get better. And we've none of that. Brexit was all about taking back control of our economy. How's that gone? Taking back control of immigration. How's that gone? And what have we got for it? We've got sovereignty. I know there'll be people who write in the comments, they do every week, talk about we've got sovereignty. We're no longer being told what to do by civil servants in Brussels. The whole thing's been an absolutely catastrophic disaster. And in addition to mental health issues, we're going to have a lot more crime. We're bound to have more crime because people get desperate and they know that you can get away with crime because the police are so stretched now because they're so busy going around arresting people for writing things on Facebook. And you know you can get away with crime. And a lot of people who are losing hope, especially young people, just go out and nick stuff. Shoplifting, get away with it easy. And you see more and more of these fights in the streets and so on. People are really, really stressed. And also, there's going to be a lot more racial tension because it's just so easy to blame immigrants and blame foreigners. And we saw how easy it was back in Southport and earlier in the year rather, how those riots broke out so quickly and so easily. And despite the excellent way in which the government dealt with it by being extremely ruthless. there are likely to be racial tensions, I'm sure, all being stoked by Farage. And so we've got a Prime Minister who sadly is determined to make Brexit work and to make us the fastest growing economy in the G7, who, frankly, in my view, and I'm sorry if this upsets people, I'm sorry if people are going to unsubscribe because I say it, but I don't think he's got a clue. I think this constantly saying he's going to make Brexit work is just, as I said before, it's brought down 5 previous prime ministers, it'll bring him down. And I don't see how, given his absolutely collapsing popularity, where he's become very unpopular, how he can ever turn that around. And yet he seems very confident, very happy. He seems very, 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 very relaxed about everything. And as far as the opposition, you've got the Tories, who I think have sealed their fate by appointing. By electing Badenoch as a leader, a woman who has nothing but rudeness and aggression, which we're told is very refreshing. Just an awful rude woman who would never ever be elected Prime Minister. And there's little honest Bob Jenrick. He's running around behind making videos now, all dressed in all casual and his trainers and so on, running around council estates in the Midlands saying, look how the terrible crime wave, braving Labour for this crime wave that he alleges is taking place. Tories who've been in for 14 years, several of which he was a government minister, and after 6 months he's going around telling everybody that thanks to Labour, crime is out of control. And so we know that Starmer is in power because millions of people who just couldn't vote for the Tories voted for Labour, almost as a protest, many of them, and they're all very fickle voters, all ready to go elsewhere. We know that many of them are unlikely to go back to the Tories, as I said, because the Tories are really no longer the party that they were. And so there's reform in Farage. And, when you look across the Atlantic, look at America, and you look at how Trump was elected, somebody who is so totally unsuitable. And you think how stupid Americans can be. How could they be so stupid as to elect this man as president? And then you look over here, you look at Farage. This is the man who, for years, 20 years, told us how terrible the EU was and how much better we would be if we left. And how this garnered a lot of support amongst people who were just generally dissatisfied with the government, particularly with the Tories at that time, and who kept. Farage is somebody who knows what other people are doing wrong. He can always tell you what other people are doing wrong. Brexit would have been a great success if they hadn't handled it so badly. And despite the fact that his Brexit has been a complete and utter disaster, the Brexit for which he, above everybody, is responsible. He's now a popular hero amongst millions of people, all ready to vote for him, ready to vote for a party with no experience, a party where the 3 main characters are Farage, Tice and 40p Lee Anderson. And you have to despair. But if there was an election tomorrow, chances are Farage would be Prime Minister. Almost certain, I'd have thought. And so, whilst most of my videos are a bit pessimistic, I think this is probably one of the most pessimistic, because I think at the very time when we would hope to be doing better, and when I think other countries, I've done a lot of these trips to Europe to see how other countries are doing by visiting various random cities. And I started doing this because we kept being told that it's no matter how bad it is here, it's just as bad everywhere else. And what I've shown, I think, in all my videos, that it's not anything like as bad anywhere else, and it's much, much worse here. And I think other countries, you can see they're going to get their acts together, and we've all suffered because of the power crisis and so on, and all sorts of things have been going on in the world that made things a bit more difficult than usual. But nonetheless, other countries have got economies where they're likely to pull themselves together and to work hard and succeed. Whereas here, the obstacles to our succeeding are just, it seems to me, overwhelming, and it's all self-inflicted. But anyway, with that, I'm going to shut up. And thank you very much if you've watched this far. And thank you also to everybody who's been kind enough to watch me over the past year, and particularly those of you who've kindly commented, even those who've told me in their comments how wonderful the EU is, and how terrible the EU is, and how what a good thing it is that we've taken back sovereignty. And so with that, I wish you a very happy new year, and until next time, bye for now.